Why are Black and Latino men being incarcerated at alarming rates in the United States of America? This topic is important because the mass incarceration of Black and Latino men not only affects their chances of having a successful life, but it also affects their families and communities as well. People of color make up 30% of the U.S. population, but represent 60% of the prison population. Men of color are disproportionately being policed, imprisoned, and sentenced to death at higher rates than their white counterparts. The U.S. prison system is a multi-billion-dollar industry and can be closely associated with slavery. The government and private companies create these factories in the prison compound in which prisoners are made to work in several trades and aren't properly compensated for their work. The criminal justice system are using these inmates as cheap labor and are capitalizing off their hard work, just like plantation owners capitalized off the cheap labor of slaves. This is simply morally wrong, and if we continue to allow this to happen, history will indeed repeat itself.
Go.
Okay, so describe how you did your research for this paper. For this assignment, our group looked up databases that help with sociology. We tried keywords like incarceration, race, arrest rates, black men, and people of color. We wanted to see how the articles intersected mass incarceration and race. The key points for our project were mass incarceration, of course, the effects it has on their families and communities, as well as the prison system, how the prison system compares with slavery. The amount of information we were able to find was a lot, but it was good because we were able to weed through things. It's better to have too much than too little. And what was interesting is that initially I thought that the articles would primarily focus on the inner city, like New York and Chicago, and racial profiling, but it also focused on high incarceration rates and the impact it had on communities and families. And we figured there would be some sort of impact on families and communities, but the extent of it was more pronounced as we researched the topic.
So, in our findings, what we have discovered about the topic that we're discussing, we found several articles, but mainly three, that discussed how hypercriminalization can not only affect parents and adolescents, but the community as well. People that surround an individual who's been incarcerated. And what is the perception that people have towards blacks and blacks themselves? In one particular article called "The Mass Incarceration of Parents in America, Issue of Race, Ethnicity, and Collateral Damage to Children in Prisoner Reentry" by Holly Foster and John Hagan, they state, "Mass incarceration is a result of hypercriminalization of particular men of color due to their social class and characteristics that stem from their geographical background." Now here what it's stating is that culture plays a factor in incarceration. Such example of the culture would be their dress code, the way they dress, their behavior, how they interact with others, in a sense that it develops some sort of mentality to people of what they think of an individual that behaves something that is completely different out of the norm that they're used to following. Not only does it affect their chances of having a successful life, but it also affects their families and communities as well, being that the majority of inmates being incarcerated are parents. Trajectories have momentum and direction, so that adolescents arrested in the context of families with official crime histories may have too few conventional opportunities to alter their lives through school, work, or other institutions emphasizing traditional occupational attainment models, which results in the culmination of disadvantage over rather than advantage, and therefore of detainment rather than attainment. Now what it's discussing here is that adolescents, they too have an impact on parents being incarcerated, or should I say, parents who are incarcerated have an impact on the way adolescents behave, how they interact socially, because of the fact that you have a parent that is incarcerated. You're missing some sort of parental figure, giving you some sort of education at home, and without that sort of education, it could lead the adolescent to, instead of looking for education from at home, but somewhere in the streets where they don't have that same access towards education as other people do. And for that reason, the way they construct their mentality when they're growing up, it may not be the same as other people do. And therefore, sometimes you may see cases of incarceration between adolescents because of this sort of basic knowledge that adolescents would develop when they have parents incarcerated. The next case would be in the race of a criminal record. In the article, The Race of a Criminal Record, the researchers sought to expand on a previous study that tested the hypothesis that the association between blacks and crime is bidirectional, meaning it works in two ways. Thus, the authors argue that just as black faces and black bodies can trigger thoughts of crime, thinking of crime can trigger thoughts of black people. Now, here's an interesting quote that the authors made, where in the first part, just as black faces and black bodies can trigger thoughts of crime. Here, in a way, is describing the mentality people have in modern day towards people of color, where, again, as I said previously, of culture, that the way people dress, the way they behave, that how people take that into their own state of mind, what they see in a person, that perhaps when they see a person wearing some clothes that people call it hoodlum clothes, they would see it and say, okay, this person may be a criminal, maybe I should call the cops to prevent some sort of crime from occurring, or I should just stay away from him. That sort of mentality is being described in this phrase. The next part is saying that thinking of crime can trigger thoughts of black people. Here is something different. It's talking about the mentality, the thoughts of people of color, what they do. What is the reason behind their actions, or do they even commit the crimes themselves? It's not about what others think, but the individual, the person who is going to commit the crime. What is their take on it? Why do they commit it? And why would they refrain from it? And in most cases, people who, like say a robber, commits a burglary. Some people think they just do it just for the heck of it. But sometimes it's out of sheer desperation that not everyone else understands. And for people of color, they're stigmatized because of the mentality of others. And majority of the time, they don't pay attention to people of color, what they think, what their lives are like. Their study sought to extend their work by taking this question out of the realm of subliminal priming and computerized images and into everyday interactions. What they did is, instead of focusing on social media, they focused on the people individually, the victims, people who have been incarcerated. Again, as I said before, they're not, instead of focusing on what the mainstream thinks, they're thinking about they're more of concentrating on people who have been victimized, who have been stigmatized by the criminal justice system, to grasp a better understanding between the relation of mass incarceration and race. In Dorothy Roberts' article, The Moral and Social Cost of Mass Incarceration in African American Communities, she discusses that people of color who are incarcerated and others who know him, that their relations with the person incarcerated are affected. Those who live with him and depend on him for personal and economic support, those things disrupt. The fact that seeing how, like, for example, you're putting it in a perspective where a person is applying for a job and they say, yes, they're convicted from a crime. The chances of them getting hired are very low because of that. Due to the fact that companies, they don't want to receive some sort of bad reputation when they have some sort of person who was a criminal in the past, and people may think, oh, this person might commit a crime again, and so for that reason they would try to shift away from people who've been incarcerated and look for people who have a clean record because of that. And even in communities too, people are affected when they have a friend or such who are incarcerated. Of course, not everyone takes things the same way, but in some cases, people who have friends who are incarcerated, they too shift away from that because the social pressure that they would receive from other people, they would think, oh, if he's a criminal, if he's friends with that criminal, he's probably going to be a criminal too, that he's probably involved with the criminal acts that person committed. And from that case, people would tend to disrupt their relationship with the person incarcerated in order to keep themselves clean, while the person incarcerated, they remain in the position that they're in.
During the discussion part of our project, two surprising facts that we found was that, I didn't know that government and private companies it was that severe for labor. I didn't know that it wasn't, it was like similar to sweatshops, being that there's no labor laws, the minimum wage or overtime is not, affected by them. Also that it's very discriminating. Secondly, I didn't know, being that social media is all about, you see these videos of cops, abusing and mistreating, black citizens. You never really see them attacking Hispanics or anything of that issue. But in terms that is even much worse, because for Mexicans or Afro-Caribbeans, it's more than just ethnicity. It's about their legal status in America and how that plays into how they're criminalized. Also, you would think that the incarceration will be a rehabilitation for people who commit crimes or for criminals, to try to better themselves and try to have time to think about while they're serving their time. But unfortunately, it's come to the fact that it's criminalizing just to a group of people in general, or a group of population. It's mistreating, discriminating, and these governments and these companies are using it for a profit. One thing that we didn't really see in our research was that our articles never really talked about the woman's perspective from being that they're incarcerated, and we would like more research done on that and see how they deal with it, or what their perspective is, being that it's always the traditional men are incarcerated, they're home with the families, they're single parents, and how they deal with it instead of the role reversal. Yeah, and that's it.
Slavery and segregation was eliminated decades ago, yet continues on even in modern day. Though it is not harsh as before, it still affects communities because of the criminal justice system's unfair treatment towards people of color. The effects children and communities have when someone they know and love are incarcerated can be harmful not only to them but to those who are in prison as well. Even when they are released from prison, it is difficult to build themselves up again due to the criminal record. Their criminal record now created, it becomes a social barrier to people of color. It is important to understand what is going regarding to this situation, because how will societies advance if this occurs frequently? People have disadvantages because of a criminal record. If America is the land of opportunity, the land of freedom, why is this type of racial discrimination still continuing and causing harm to communities and families? We are still living in a land of ignorance. We must fight this ignorance in order to eliminate this discrimination, or else Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream of equality will only remain a dream and not reality.